Parents, what spooky, past life, memory did your kid utter?
My grandma has a story from when my dad was 2 to 3 years old. He told her once that he was almost born before but was too sick and died and had to come back later. Turns out my grandma had at least one miscarriage before he was born that was likely due to birth defects caused by a medication she had been taking at the time.
Holy poo. I just lost my second son at 20 weeks. He was sick from a placenta infection and I almost died. I had a dream he came back later in another body that suited him better. Both my husband and I have this insane feeling we will meet him again soon in a healthy body. This post blows my effing mind.
From a message my ex sent me last year about our daughter who was 3 at the time. On hearing a motorbike. I had one before I was little, it went whoosh and then I had no legs and mummy and daddy had to help me but I didn't want to so I went to sleep and now I'm too little.
When my youngest was about that age he told me about a motorcycle accident he had when he was 16 and he died. We were driving in the car at the time and he saw a motorcycle like the one he had. Still freaks me out thinking about it.
My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister and my other mom was really sad. When she started preschool at 3 they had a fire drill and she cried hysterically until it was over and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up and on the way home she told me she's glad they have fire drills so all of the kids don't die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out.
My daughter talks about her grandson all the time. I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but then a couple nights ago she came out of her room at bedtime absolutely sobbing and said, "I'm sad because I miss my grandson. He lives in my old house in my old neighborhood. She has never lived anywhere other than this apartment."
Wow, you should ask her what her grandson's name was.
I wonder if she would be able to describe the house and neighborhood at all.
I was driving my family across the state to visit family. Some commercial on the radio about Vegas came on and I started singing, "Viva Las Vegas," in my best Elvis impersonation. My son was about 3 to 4 and he says, "I don't like Vegas. I lost my life and a lot of money there." His mom and I glanced at each other like, WTF? He never said anything else about it.
Imagine having a son who was dealing with the mafia in his past life lol.
I love the "and a lot of money" part because it puts living and having that money on the same level of importance, which is how I imagine some people actually do think, which ups the creepy factor.
Not exactly the same thing, but my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, "When I look in mirrors there are a lot of people in here," and, "Why were so many people in my room last night?" For like 2 years.
I really wish I hadn't read this one while laying awake in the dark while I'm supposed to be sleeping.
Not me but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister as soon as they walked in said, "I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here." To which her mother replied, "We've never been here before." "What do you mean?" she replied with, "No. My mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." The family was obviously a little freaked out but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young and they figured just messing around. Later on though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there and the waitress revealed that it in fact was an art studio for many years in the 1900s but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps and were at a loss for words.
One of my preschool students, "What do you want to do when you're a kid again?" Me, "Well, grown-ups don't become kids again. We grow up and stay grown-ups." Her, "Well, I remember when I was a grown-up and I drove a car. And now I'm a kid again."
Anyone interested in this sort of thing should look up the WW2 US General George S. Patton. He allegedly attributes many of his victories throughout Europe to a familiarity with the battlefields, having fought on them countless times in past lives. I'm pretty sure there's a book about it. Edit. I found the book on Amazon. https://www.amazon.com/pattern-lives-battles-general-reincarnation/dp/148125743/?ref_b_b_marketplace.
He came from a long line of men who died in battle when he and his men were trapped by German troops. He charged into the German army saying, "It's time for another pattern to die." Many of the stories on here are family related, so it's possible.
When my brother was about 3 back in the 90s, our family was sitting down for dinner and he randomly said, "Dad, remember when I lived in Spain? We're from the UK," and my dad, humoring him, said, "Yeah?" And he continued that he lived in Spain before with his other family, but he died when he was on a fishing trip with his dad, and the last thing he remembers is his dad's hand trying to reach him as he drowned. He also reeled off some Spanish names for his parents, which there was no way he would have known those kind of names, and he started to sort of meditate in his room from time to time. He eventually stopped talking about it as he got a little older and doesn't remember anything about it anymore. Crazy to hear so many other people have similar experiences.
When he was around 4, my grandson used to talk about his job at the ice factory. One day he was talking about his boss, Favo, and the day he quit. I asked him why he quit, and he turned to me and quite passionately said, "I'll tell you why I quit. They made me work 15 days in a row without a break, and I had enough of that." It was weird hearing all that righteous anger coming out of that little boy.
IDKY, but this is effing hilarious. I would lose my poo if a 4-year-old started complaining to me about his boss, Farvo, not giving him a day off from the ice factory in weeks.
I'm just imagining him saying this in a Jimmy Stewart voice.
My 5-yo boy has a lot of creepy past life utterings, but the most concerning was when he told me he was going to be replaced soon by a brown girl with long hair.
I'd be like, "Damn right you will if you keep scaring the poo out of me. Lol."
Apparently when I was really little, around 3 or so, I told my mom that this was my last time here, that I wasn't going to come back.
Better make this one count then.
Congratulations on obtaining enlightenment.
My daughter would refer to me as her new mommy. Then, as her vocabulary increased, she said, "You're my new mommy, but it's okay, I like you." Then one day, "You're my new mommy. I had 2 brothers, but they all died, but it's okay BC, I like you." She never mentioned her real family again. Last time she did, she was about 3 or 4 years old.
We named our son after my father, who passed away 3 years before he was born. My father pumped gas at a local gas station for years. My son saw one of the oil trucks drive by one day and proceeded to talk about how he was pumping gas at the gas station. It weirded me right out, cause we never talked about that before. He's only 3 years old.
My younger sister, when she was 3, started talking to my mum about when I was a big girl, and you were a little girl. She said she went to my parents' wedding. She described her old self physically, and my mum says that sounded like my mum's grandmother Grace. My sister also talked about the green house she used to live in at the end of a dirt road, and the fact that her mother, my mum's great-grandmother Matilda, died from a snake bite while they lived there. She described the snake as pretty, and with the full description my mum thinks she was describing a copperhead. Now we lived in northern Nebraska, no copperheads, and Matilda died in southeast Oklahoma, Copperhead region. My sister said she killed the snake with a hoe. These discussions always took place at bedtime. One day, we were putting in the garden and my dad was sitting down and sharpening the hoe with a file, and my sister told him he was doing it wrong. He told her to show him how to do it. She put her hands on his and placed them in the correct position, and later he said that she was right, he was doing it wrong. For those of you interested in timelines, this would be in 1980, my mother's grandmother Grace died in 1968, and her great-grandmother Matilda died in 1902. Also, we don't know if snakebite was the cause of death for her great-grandmother Matilda. I was 15 at the time these little nightly discussions were going on, so I remember them fairly well. She probably told these things on and off for about 6 months, and by 4 she would say, "I'm tired of talking about it." I am not a great writer, so I hope this is not too confusing.
Nah, you're grand. I understood anyway.
My little brother, when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals, and one day he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us, but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever. Just for a little while. He passed this last January at 26 years old.
Sorry for your loss.
This breaks my heart. If you don't mind the question, and please feel free not to answer. Does it bring you any comfort that on some level, he may have known this was his path? Or that he was only meant to be here for a short time? It's so recent that I imagine there are 1,000 things you are feeling.
I think we all knew this was his path, but it's hard to say it's comforting. I believe he lived to the fullest, but again it's pretty recent, so we're all kind of figuring out how we reconcile all of that.
I don't know how old I was, but when I was young, less than 6, I was in the car with my parents and I said something like, "Oh, I used to live there," while pointing at a house we were driving past. Turns out it was my great-great-grandmother's house.
When I was 3, I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed. The siblings I had and the dog too. One day she took me to Target and I told her I wanted big girl undies and she said she would buy them for me and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family already potty trained me so I can start wearing them now. I put them on that day and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me and was just shocked.
Would totally accept creepy story for someone else potty training my kid.
I need to remember to have potty training pre-installed if I have any children.
Aged 2 or 3, my daughter told us about when she and her other parents had to run away from their burning house, but not just their house, everything around them was on fire. They didn't escape. She also told us how warm and cozy it was in her mother's womb.
I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child. Another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born.
My son told my parents all about Coco and Boo Boo. Described the cats to them. He was 4. My cats, Coco and Boo Boo, had died 4 or 5 years before he was born. When my mom showed him various pictures of cats we had, he pointed them both out and told her Coco liked to knock things off the table. Coco had a nickname, Princess Knock It Off, because she would knock over anything she could. I didn't have any pictures of these cats myself, so he'd never seen them. I didn't talk to him about them either, because we had other cats now. Coco and Boo Boo were litter mates and a bonded pair.
When my son was about 3, he told us how he remembered being a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. This was in 1998.
Remembering that must be terrifying for a kid. Obligatory, not the parent but the kid here. Apparently used to have rather frequent bouts of nightmares back when I was 4. And it always began with me screaming the name Sarah, then calling for help loudly, which would wake pretty much everyone in the house up, and ending with me just blubbering out, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over and over again, all the while crying and sobbing. When I would wake up in the morning, I'd have no recollection about any of this. My parents had no idea what caused it, given that they knew no one named Sarah that I had interacted with. We had no TV or anything of the sort, I hadn't begun going to preschool yet, and didn't know how to read beyond a few simple words. Nothing they did seemed able to stop it either. The whole thing went on for a good long while, almost a year, until one day, it just sort of stopped. Mum apparently tried asking me once about it, and kid me said something to the effect of, "Sarah doesn't want to see me crying anymore. So I won't." Didn't actually know any of this happened until some years back when I got to talking to my parents about how I always found the name Sarah to be beautiful.
Not a parent, but a few years ago when my sister was about 3 or 4, this song from the 60s came on TV. Never heard it before and it had never been on our TV before, but my sister sang every word and knew all the dance moves. She said something about how she liked it when she was little. She also used to refer to our mum as her new mum, and would say how her old mum had yellow hair, things like that. Got hella experiences with her and her past life, but can't remember them in full detail, so I'll ask my mum tomorrow because they're crazy and I want to share.
Yes, more.
My mum did that with some Native American song probably 20 years ago. I just listened to her until the song finished and told her she must have had a past life with that tribe, wish I knew which one, because it was in the tribe's language. Neither of us had ever heard it before, but she sang every word and note clear as a bell. Thing was, she hadn't even realized she was singing with it. Edit emailed her. Unfortunately she doesn't remember what song it was. She remembers it happened, just not what the song was. Like I said, it was a long time ago. Sorry guys, I tried. This comment section taught me something: never lower your guard around 3-year-olds.
Apparently when I was a kid, my dad and I were watching Survivorman. Apparently it was an episode where he was in the woods, and I said something along the lines of, "I got lost in the woods once with friends, but I was never found."
I mean, hide and seek maybe. At this point, I'm kinda freak out bit can't stop and I'm just going with the sunshine and rainbows options when I can.
My middle son, 5, is named after my wife's grandfather. He just looked at her a couple of weeks ago and said, "I remember when you were little and you sat on my lap." He also once gazed into my mother-in-law's eyes, at 3 to 4 years old, stroked her cheek and said, "My daughter."
Imagine giving birth to your grandfather.
My mom said when I was pretty young she was driving me to daycare before work and I told her, "You should have called Irma last night before she died." This was an old coworker she loved. Turns out Irma had died that night.
That's enough Reddit for today, I think. I have accumulated enough nightmare material.
I don't have kids, but when my brother was a toddler he said something to my mom about throwing hay in the window for the horses. My grandfather died before his birth and was a farmer. The barn had windows and he would just throw the hay in the windows for the horses to eat. My mom was really freaked out, but he never said anything else similar again.
To entertain the idea for a moment, did your grandfather die while your mom was pregnant?
Possibly. My brother was born in May 1977. My grandfather died in 1976, but I'm not sure of the month. I'll have to ask my mom. Edit. I asked her. He died in August, so she wasn't pregnant, although it wasn't long before she got pregnant.
When my son was 4, we had driven past a cemetery. He asked me if I remembered when he died and was buried. I said no and asked him what he meant by saying that. He said he had died, was buried in a cemetery, and that's when he started growing in my belly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said this. He doesn't remember say this.
It seems obvious on second thought. I just realized one of the implications of reincarnation, that when you die, you just reappear at inside another body and you still remember your previous life. Perhaps slowly, the memories of your previous life start to fade. And you're desperately trying to hang on, but feel them slipping away and you're powerless to stop it. But you can't tell anybody or write anything down because your body isn't developed enough, or perhaps you haven't even been born yet. In some way it sounds like a nightmare. Some people look forward to dying at the end so they can be in heaven with their loved ones. I'll get to see my mom or dad or dog again, but psych. You just get to slowly forget they ever existed, and that process would be heartbreaking.
My mom told me when I was 3 or 4 that I scream-cried when we passed an old blue Volkswagen Bug. I told her that was the car I died in. It was apparently very hot and I had a baby in my belly.
Old Volkswagens were air-cooled, so it got hot in the cabin as opposed to liquid-cooled, radiated cars now, and had a tendency to catch fire. This is my interpretation of the very hot part.
Yes, the car was on fire. OMG, this creeps me out.
My son was little, about 4 years, and he was playing with his toys and talking. I asked him, "Who are you playing with?" He replied with my sister's name. My sister died when I was young.
My daughter was sick and I chalked it up to fever delirium. When she was 5, I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard her just laughing up a storm. Having this full-blown hilarious conversation with someone, my thoughts were that she either got a hold of my phone and called a grandparent or was talking to her little brother. I go into her room. She's sitting with her legs crossed on her bed looking in front of her, just talking to nothing. I go and sit on the edge of the bed. She introduces me to the friend. I have never been more creeped out because the way she behaved. I felt that person in the room too. It was weird. They agreed that she needed to go back to bed so she could feel better. I got her some Gatorade and Tylenol. She went back to sleep. I never heard about the person again. Was just so weird and spooky. When she was a bit younger, she used to talk about the old man that would come visit her. I would watch her just laugh and laugh while standing up at the edge of her crib. A part of me feels like she's just really good at creeping me out. Kids, man, they really can make you question if you're sane.
My son was 3 at the time. At bedtime he said, "Mama, one time the bad guys got me and drove me in their car." And I said, "What?" And he continued to tell me a story about being locked in a room and he was hungry and I didn't find him. The bad guys got away and he never got out. That shish. He scared me so much I still get freaked by it. I held him so right that night.
Jesus, that's creepy. I used to tell my mum that I could see a lady coming out of the wall and standing at the foot of my bed. I have no memory of this, but apparently my uncle and cousins on my mom's side used to see a lady at the foot of their beds as well when they were toddlers.
When my nephew was about 3 or 4, my sister said he was throwing a tantrum in the car while he was in his car seat and he yelled at her randomly, "I waited 100 years to be born."
You trying to tell me there's a 100-year waiting list to be reincarnated?
Interesting to think about. I wonder if he just chose to wait that long tears of joy.
100 years of waiting, and now this poo? When my daughter was 3, she hugged me while she was falling asleep and said I'm her favorite mama. Her. I love you even more than my other mama. Me. Your other mama? Her. Yeah, she died. Me. Oh? Her. She got eaten by rats. Me. Now wide awake. Oh. Her. But it's okay because I cut them open and got her out. Me. Wow. Was she okay? Her. Oh no. She still died. Sweet dreams, though. Edit. Spaces.
It happens to the best of us.
My middle son used to talk about having a different mum before me. He would say she was blonde and looked nice but wasn't nice. He would bring it up randomly and only ever got a bit emotional when he would tell me that when he was with her he never got to grow up. He said he chose me to be his mum this time because I would let him grow up and get old. When he would say the last part it was as if he was looking for reassurance. He'd ask me like, right, mum? I can grow up this time? Really F'd me up sometimes.
Dude, that's the creepiest for me so far.
Is he implying that she killed him? JFC.
I was at a nature show with my daughter, the kind where they bring animals out and tell the audience about them. This particular show was about wolves, and the handler was telling the audience why she did what she did with the wolves. My daughter, maybe 4 at the time, said, I used to do that. I asked her what she meant. She said, just as factually as a 4-year-old could possibly be, that she used to train dogs and wolves before she died. She herself looked confused for a bit, as though this thought was surprising to her as well. I didn't know what to say, so I said, well, that's interesting. She enjoyed the rest of the show and never spoke of it again.
I used to watch my nephew when he was about 3 or 4. One day he was at my house and pointed to a magnet of Arizona. It had a picture of the desert with rock formations. Kid pointed at it and asked where it was. He said he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family, who all had straight, dark hair. His is blonde and curly. Now, and that he had a mom and a dad and he had had a brother until he went too far into the desert, too close to dark, and got eaten by, not dogs, not wolves but smaller. I said, coyotes. And he kind of mouthed the word and said, oh, that's what you call them. Then he was sad and didn't want to talk about it anymore, so we had lunch and that was the first and last time he mentioned it.
As soon as I could talk, about 2, I would tell my parents about my moon family and how I had lived with them until I said a bad word and got sent to Earth and landed in a bush where my mom made a salad from the leaves, and that's how she had me. I would make my mom so mad by telling her she was doing stuff differently than my moon mama.
Ha, that must have been some bad word. That's hilarious how you trolled your mom about it. She must have been at her wit's end on a few days. I'm still convinced I'm supposed to have an older brother and an identical twin, but mine swears I was her first pregnancy and a single from the very first ultrasound.
Damn. Give the kid an ice cream. Going out by coyotes. Not a good way to go.
My nephew, around 2 or 3, would talk about his other mum and then look confused when you asked him to elaborate. She's not here now.
Might have been daddy's girlfriend.
I had similar experiences at age 3. I can still vaguely remember them.
According to my dad, when I was around 5 I was staring out of the window during a heavy thunderstorm. When he asked me what I was doing I answered, when do the bombs drop? Are they gone yet? I grew up in Germany, and my dad's dad used to alert the city for incoming air raids. My grandpa died 3 days before I was born, and at 5 I had no idea about the war, or my grandpa. Really freaked him out at the time. A couple moments later I forgot what I said when he asked me more questions.
This one really creeps me out.
Now I'm scared to talk to my 3-year-old.
Seriously though, why does nearly every story here mention a 3 or 4-year-old?
Didn't believe in ghosts and poo until this day, but it's fair to say that now I have a slightly more open mind. Our 2/3-year-old daughter was playing on her own, but like she was playing hide and seek with an imaginary friend. I asked, are you playing hide and seek? She said yes. Who are you playing with? Uncle Andrew. My wife's brother Andrew was 7 when he drowned when my wife was 5. Didn't like to talk about it, so we never mentioned it.
My cousin's kid was jumping on the bed and had her hands out like she was holding onto something. When asked what she was doing, she said playing with Grandpa. Cousin asked, who's Grandpa? Yours, Mommy. When asked what he looked like, she described him to a T, and jumping on the bed was such a grandpa thing to do. He had died when she was 5 months old, and my grandma died before she was born. couple days later, they were at my mum's, and my mum had a picture of her parents. She walked up, dragging her brother with her, and said, "Look Jay, that's Grandma and Grandpa. Remember? They play with us sometimes."
Wow. That's very interesting.
Not exactly what you asked, but my granddaughter, when she was about 3, told me she dreamed about her sister, she only has brothers, who was just this big, holding her thumb and finger about a half-inch apart. She doesn't know her mother had a miscarriage before she was born.
My son used to always talk about his big brother, and how he came and talked to him when he was scared and played games with him and all kinds of things. He didn't know we had miscarried a little boy before he was born. Probably his big brother was just what he called his imaginary friend, but it was super creepy regardless.
My son said once, "Mommy, when I was big and you were little, I remember when we danced in the kitchen. The only person I ever danced in a kitchen with as a child was my grandfather."
Comforting and yet creepy at the same time.
When my daughter was 4, she told she used to be my grandma. Which I'd like to believe it's true because when I was pregnant with her I would dream my grandma frequently.
My parents don't use Reddit, so I'll answer this for them. I think I was 3 playing with a corkscrew when I blurted out that I used to have one of these when I had black hair, I'm blonde. My parents said they asked me what it was and I responded that it's used for opening wine. Freaked the hell out of them.
My son is 9. He's had a recurring dream where he starts calling, Meg, 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 Meej, like kinda desperately calling for someone in his sleep. Probably like 20 to 30 times he calls for Meg before he finally wakes up. Side note, we don't know anyone named Meg, or Megan like at all. There's not even one in his grade, we checked. Creeps the F out of you, hearing a 9-year-old call for someone that sounds so important to him when this happens.
This is a good one. Thanks for sharing.
Answer for my parents. When I was 4, my parents and I went to my aunt's farm. The wind started picking up and I looked back at my parents and said, "Gotta tie the hay bale down in the wind." That's how David died. To this day no one knows who David is.
Weird. A man named David died after a hay bale fell on him last year. https://www.wfmz.com/news/area/barks/man-kill-in-dash-workplace-article_10347238-5fbf-11a-86c-8f8cb4644D6.html.
I'm the kid in this case. I don't believe in the paranormal. I'm a pretty reasonable guy. I have degrees in science and healthcare and I'm pretty grounded. But since I was a child, I had a memory of me stumbling out the back door of a club. I couldn't hold myself, either really drunk or on DG, and I slipped down a staircase, hit my head in the alley and died. I was about 19, I was thin, had long blonde hair, I was wearing a brown red leather jacket. I remember the neon signs, the staircase, the door I walked out of, even the interior. I can paint the picture perfectly if I had any talent in art. Anyways, so 2 years ago, I took a leisure trip to Budapest, and while exploring the ruined pubs with my wife, I found the effing alley. It was funny because I remarked to my wife earlier, when we arrived, that I felt something about Budapest that felt like home and familiar, and I felt oddly too comfortable there, like I could have never left. I think about this quite often. Edit, because I suck at Reddit. This is late. The alley is found in what is now Instant Club. I grabbed a clear photo of the area and my trajectory. http://imager.com/a/s11wow2. The question I have is, what was this club before I was born, 1988?
You should try to find out if there was ever a reported death in that alley.
I guess I will. It never occurred to me until now to try. It would have had to have been in the 70s, 80s.
Was watching an old video of a jazz drummer playing a solo. No idea who it was, but he was really good. My daughter, probably age 3, was looking over my shoulder for a minute before she said, "I used to play the drums like that when I was a man."
You should get her some sticks.
Not a mum, but I was a nanny for many years. This is going to be long and I apologize in advance. One of my little ones, 2 years old, an incredibly smart child, way ahead developmentally in almost every way. He used to like to tell me things while we got him ready for bed. It was almost always these weird stories which would always start with, when I was an old lady. And they were always very specific little, day in the life of type things which I quickly realized went beyond the life experience and typical vocabulary of a 2 years old. Over a few months he kept adding very consistently to this story. He would also sometimes play as this old lady, with a cloth over his head and walking slowly as if his back pained him. Grocery shopping or playing with his sister's dolls as if they were his grandchildren was his favorite when he did this. He added some specific details like how many children she had, 4 daughters and a son, and how many grandchildren. Her husband had died in his 50s, same age as one of his uncles, from a lung disease. One of her daughters had died in their 30s in a car accident, leaving 2 children who she took in with the help of another daughter. She had a bad back and pain in her feet. One of her daughters would rub her feet to help with the pain. All but one of her children was married. The unmarried daughter lived with her and she worried she would never marry. She remembered dying. She had been crossing a street and hit by a car. She described how people stood around her, where it hurt, how someone eventually lifted her into a car, no ambulances, and took her to hospital where she died. I was not his only nanny, and he was consistent with these stories. Us nannies would get together and swap stories and I would write them down because I had been fascinated with phenomena like past lives before this and wanted to see where it all went. He also described the house and neighborhood they lived in. This is especially interesting as this kid came from a super wealthy family and had never even seen the kind of housing or poverty he was describing. He also talked about living by the seaside. Months into this unfolding, we visited a seaside city on the other side of the country. One day a family member there was having a birthday party, so we piled in the van to drive over, and our driver got lost. This is pre-Google Maps and smartphone times. We ended up driving through this extremely poor neighborhood and suddenly my little boy started shouting and screaming and insisted we turn down a couple of specific streets. He started pointing out the window and telling us things he was recognizing from when I was an old lady. It matched to what he'd previously described in general and we were all so interested we let him direct us where to go as we were already going to be late for the party anyway. He accurately described what we would see round the next turn several times but got extremely confused and upset when he got to where her house was because it was now a store. The driver leaned out the window and asked a nearby old person what had been there before the store and was told, houses. We never went back there or were able to get any additional verification. Totally understandably his parents were concerned about this storytelling and how vivid and strange it was. So after this dramatic incident we made an active effort to redirect him to other stories and play types. As he approached 3 he started telling less and less of these stories, and they got less and less specific. By about 3.5 he couldn't even remember telling us stories about being an old lady. He thought we were joking with him. To this day, over 25 years later, I can't explain it really.
This was told to me by my parents. When I was 6 or so my dad was watching a war documentary and it talked about a tube. I then said, "You mean the tube from when I was a grown-up?" My dad asked me to explain more and I said, "Me and another person was put in a tube with a knife and was tasked to kill the other person but I got stabbed in the chest." He says it still keeps him up at night.
Sounds like a tunnel rat from Vietnam.
That is unnervingly vivid, but back Nam we had that tunnel.
My son is 9 now. When he was just starting to learn to talk, perhaps around 18 months old, a relative bought him a toy monkey. He insisted on calling it Gonga, so much so that I googled it. OMG. https://www.doyouremember.co.uk/memory/Gonga. Gonga, a toy monkey from the 70s, 80s. He was born in 2011. Edit. For everyone asking, he didn't just babble it once, he repeatedly said it, like, Gonga 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 Gonga, whenever he saw it. I had never heard it called that. I never had one. He hadn't seen Donkey Kong, etc.
OMG. I had a Gonga as a child. I was devastated when I lost it on a family trip. Thanks for the unexpected memory.
My little brother was born just after 9/11. When he was a toddler one time, he went on about how he used to work in a tall building and wore a suit and tie. Freaked my parent out.
This makes me think that neither of us goes to the afterlife. We just get reincarnated somewhere else in the world, at a different era.
My coworker has a son who, when he was about 3, told her he used to grow rice and lived in a place where 2 rivers met. He was able to name the rivers, and she located it on a map of East Asia. pretty wild.
Damn, that's impressive that he knew the names and they checked out. Creepy though.
I know, right? She said she didn't believe in past lives until that moment. Of course, her son was oh so nonchalant about the entire thing, yet didn't remember anything about it when he was older. But when younger, he would easily chat about his life way back when.
My 5-year-old daughter said to me, "I was in your belly twice, Mama. The first time I died before I came out, but I came back." Quote, "I did lose my first pregnancy 8 months before getting pregnant again. She was never told. I don't know what it was, but that's what happened." Edit, thanks everyone. In typical Reddit fashion, I didn't expect this one to blow up quite so much. Lol. But my daughter is pretty awesome and has a crazy amazing memory. She recalls events from when she was 2. So, she very likely heard my husband and I discussing it. Any other explanation sort of, well, creeps me out. Ha. And pregnancy after miscarriage is a weird bundle of emotions. I understand how this can help people when they are feeling a loss, but that was not my intention with the post or anything. If it helps, I'm very happy to have shared this weird little memory. Be well everyone.
I had that memory also. When I told my mom, she was shocked. I'm an only child and I never knew she was pregnant before me. But she was, and that's when she admitted it.
My little brother said when he was 3 or 4. When I was a grown-up, I went to war, and I never came back.
When my little brother was 3 or 4, he said, "Wouldn't it be funny if we just put tacos all over the floor?" And I live by that every day.
Preschool in Florida can be like that sometimes.
When my son was around 4, he asked my wife about the house that you and Grandpa owned together. They never owned a house together. But I asked for more info, and without hesitation he replied, "You know, the house that was burnt down by the volcano."
When I was about 4, I walked into the laundry where Mum was doing the washing and asked her what she was doing, then stood there with my hands on my hips and said, "When I was old I didn't do it like that." Another time I sat bolt upright from a nightmare and Mum, trying to comfort me, asked about the dream and where she was, and I apparently said coldly, "I told you Mummy, it was a long time ago, you weren't there," and just went back to sleep. Kids are spooky, not having them for fear they'll be the horror movie kind that scurry past doorways in the dark.
But you're that spooky kid.
It ends with me.
So this is mine. I had a baby doll as a kid, 2 to 3 years old, and named her after a family surname that's French and vaguely feminine, and definitely not something a British kid would usually come up with. Problem was, use of that particular family name traces back before even my great-grandparents, when it was lost to a paternal surname, and so was never mentioned in my house. The family tree wasn't even being worked on at the time. I still wonder about it.
My daughter is about to turn 4 and talks about being in belly a lot. She recalls details and things I did while pregnant that I know I haven't told her or talked about. She talks about the day I rode the school bus to the mini town. I took my students on a field trip when I was nearly 9 months pregnant to a mini city play place. She tells me it was dark, but she heard my heart and heard my voice.
None of mine have, but back pre-pandemic I was watching my friend's then 3-year-old for her, and he saw a big military ship and he got this kind of faraway look and said, "I remember when my boat sank. There were so many sharks." I said, "What?" He blinked, said what, and then started asking questions about the boat. I mentioned it to my friend and she said, "Yeah, he does that sometimes."
My great-uncle was in the Australian Merchant Navy during WW2. Apparently he was on 3 separate ships that sank. On one of them sharks ate a lot of the drowning people. He was on a lifeboat for a day or so before a rescue plane spotted them and dropped supplies. The supplies were just out of reach of the boat, so his colleague jumped in to grab it, but was taken by a shark as he swam to the supplies. It was a good time to be a shark.
When I was a kid, I told my parents that I died in a fire on a big ship during a war. That alone isn't super special, but they asked what kind of ship and I said, a blockade runner. That's very specific knowledge for a small child, right? If I remember correctly, it was called the Zephyr and was in Charleston, South Carolina at some point. I've not found any info about that ship being real, but I haven't remembered in years. Edit. I don't have time to look into it, but https://www.ny-times.com/1865/03/02/archive/from-havana-blockade runners-coming-back-news-of-the-evacuation-of.html. Another edit. I found a list of blockade runners and there was one called the Zephyr that matches the description I gave. No pictures, though.
My son had an imaginary friend named John. It was all very specific and he even had a last name. My son would go on and on about their adventures and the things they did when they were grown up, but now he was a little boy and John wasn't. A couple years ago we looked up the name, it was a real person, died in World War II.
Mine said that he had a dream he was in heaven or some other place before he was born, with lots of men in suits who had lined up every woman on the planet, and the suits told him to pick who would be his mum. The part that creeped me out is I remember my mum telling me I had a dream exactly like that as a child.
In 2006 my best friend Nick was Kia in Iraq. We used to wrestle, fight until one of us submitted. These sessions would start randomly and always be initiated by showing your fangs. This involved pointing your pointer and middle finger down in front of your mouth while growling at the other person. A couple of weeks after his death, some family from the other side of the country that we only see every 5 years or so was visiting. My cousin's son, who was about 5 and who I never met prior to this visit, comes over. He gives me the fangs and smiles. I asked him, "Where did you learn that?" He says, "Your friend says hi," and runs away. I went to my room and cried for a bit.
When our son was maybe 3 or 4, he described his life as a ballerina on stage, from the lights, to the music, to the applause. His next words chilled me to the bone. I was at a party on a boat, and I fell into the water, then poof, I was here. I asked him to relate the story when his father came back from a business trip a couple weeks later, and it was identical. But after that we never discussed it again. I didn't want to go there.
https://www.independent.co.uk/arts-entertainment/i-lost-my-daughter-my-friend-1113754.html. She just finished studying at ballet school, was on a boat celebrating a friend's birthday that would later sink on the River Thames after being struck by a barge. Over 50 people tragically died that night. https://en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/martianus_disaster.
Wow. Did you ever investigate old news looking for such an event in the past?
I didn't because it freaked me out, but a friend looked into it a bit. She didn't get very far. What year? What country? Too many unknowns.
So this was a few years ago when Lil Dude was 5. He's sitting at the table with us, eating a bowl of Cocoa Pops, when he looks up and says, "There was a ghost floating over my bed last night." Surprised, I asked him, "Did it do anything, or say anything?" Little guy looks me dead in the eye and tells me, "The ghost told me that Kiss used to rock."
That's the kind of ghost I want to be. Educational. My daughter asked me, "Remember my fancy hat?" And when I said no, she said, "Yeah, before I was dead, I used to work in a bank. I saved my money and bought a hat in a round box. I was on the bus and a man almost sat on it. Then the bus crashed and I died." She was about 3 and totally casual about it.
Okay, now I'm going to spend tomorrow asking my daughter what she remembers about a past life. This is creepy poo.
I'm the child. Between the ages of 3 and 5 I talked about when I lived in Ireland, and I was able to tell my parents the names of the places that I remembered. My mum said she was in absolute shock because I was so casual about it. This was in the early 80s in South America. There was no internet or anything like that. We're not Irish, and no one in my family has ever been to Ireland or has any interest in it. There were no books or TV shows or anything about Ireland that I could have seen back then. One day I just stopped talking about it. I don't remember anything about this supposed past life, and I don't remember talking about Ireland as a child. A funny coincidence, though, is that my first real boyfriend was Irish. Go figure. Edit. Guys, my mother researched this stuff after I started talking about it. That's how she figured out that I was naming real places. Edit 2. Guys, I don't remember the names of the places. I think my mother might, or she might have written it down somewhere, and I'll ask her next time I talk to her. The only thing I remember is that the places I talked about were on the border between 2 counties and that there were no big cities or famous places or anything. It was either rural or like a very small village maybe. I promise I'll ask her.
A funny coincidence, though, is that my first real boyfriend was Irish. So you really did have some Irish in you.
Not when I was 5.
My father said that my bro when he was 3 said something like, "When I were bigger I had a pretty girlfriend and we died in a car." Edit, wow, this exploded. Sorry for the grammar mistake there. Actually my brother said something like cuando yo *ero *grand, when the correct way of saying it in Spanish is cuando yo *era *grand. I tried to make the toddler talking and I guess it was okay XD.
That's scary because it definitely sounds like something a child would say, but still it's very specific and creepy.
A lot of these comments have the child as being 3 years old. I wonder if that's a coincidence or that's a prime age for remembering past lives.
Not a parent, but when I was young I used to have a recurring dream where I was a Roman archer trying to fend off an attack from what looked like the Mongols. I would describe the armor and weapons to my parents without having seen them myself yet. At the time, I didn't know it was Roman armor, or Mongolian clothing, weapons. Once I did finally see the armor for myself, I was like, oh yeah, that's the armor in my dreams. I remember vividly that I was in a small line of archers next to a fort that had a tree right next to it, and the invaders came out of a seemingly dense forest on horseback. There was also a very slight hill going down from the tree, to my left. The attackers were wearing some furs and had curved swords. They easily passed through the foot soldiers, and most of our arrows missed. I remember getting struck by the sword from the man in the front, on the left side of my head. Coincidentally, there is a single grey hair that grows in the exact spot I remember getting struck. Whenever my hair would grow out a little, that grey one would show up. I've tried searching for this fort through various Google image searches, but have only found a couple that seem similar. I don't have the dream anymore, but I can still remember what everything looked like.
When I was very young and still unable to string sentences together, my mom and I were sitting at the dining room table. She was crying and I comforted my mother by telling her without any babbling or hesitation, "It's okay, I used to be your great-grandmother, I'll take care of you." I have no memory of this and my mom said I went back to my baby-like talk immediately after. She stopped crying, probably because it scared the poo out of her.
My son and I were talking about my nursing school assignments and he goes, well I kinda know this stuff anyway. I said, you do? And he said, yeah I was a doctor once, but it was like 500 years ago and I think I died when I was like 33 inches. Oh okay kiddo.
Trust me, if it was 500 years ago despite what he thinks he knows, he really does not know.
Nothing too spooky, but when my kid was 3 in the run-up their birthday, 4, they asked if they could have a puppy for their birthday, because they let me play with a puppy when I was in hospital and it made me really happy. Aside from their birth, my child has never been in a hospital, or played with a puppy. Wondered if it might have been something they'd seen on TV. But couldn't remember us watching anything like that together.
My parents and sister told me that when I was like 4 I would often spend long periods of time saying that I want to go home, despite being at my house, and when they would tell me I'm home I would say no, I want to go home.
I still feel like this as an adult sometimes. It's bizarre.
When my daughter was 3 I asked if she wanted a peanut butter sandwich. She replied, only if you put margarine on it. I don't use margarine and never used that word. I asked what she meant and she said that that's how she's always eaten it. All her lives.
Preschooler having detailed understanding of mass executions via guillotine. He described a large field with many guillotines. And their blades all came down together in a mass execution. He was among them.
Lol, that kid was part of the French bourgeoisie.
So 3-year-olds are just creepy as hell, huh?
Very recently I was actually talking to my parents about past life memories after I read this really interesting article. They ended up telling me about a past life memory I had aged 5. They actually seemed a tad worried talking about it, but as they don't have read it I will relay it, and just to be clear I have no memory of this myself. So aged 5 my parents brought me one of them toy. Police cars. I spent a little while playing in it but apparently didn't seem happy. My parents asked why I didn't seem to be liking it and I apparently told them I didn't like it because I remember being stabbed inside a car like this before I came here. I said my skin was black then though. They said they were a bit taken aback by this and just didn't speak any more about it, but then a while later my granddad came round and wanted me to show him my new toy. At this point my parents tell me I refused to get in it. Saying something like what I said to them. Apart from this time I said something more along the lines of I wasn't going to get in it because when I drove it before I came here I was stabbed and it hurt. I take it from how they speak about it that to them this seemed pretty weird. I understand that because it makes me feel weird as well. Out of curiosity I thought I'd Google and try find if any police officers died from stab wounds around the time I was born. Now I was born in the UK in 1996. I am sure that many police officers die in the line of duty each year, but one did stand out. 1996, the date when I was born, had one registered police death. The officer was black and died after being stabbed to death in his own patrol car.
This one have me the chills. That's a crazy story, thanks for sharing.
This whole thread has me wondering if, somehow, our memories are genetically instilled within our kin and develop as strange memories.
Before my oldest could talk, every time she wanted water she'd demand Gunga. Found out that's water in India.
My grandson spoke a different language for a while when he was little. We called it Jasonese. No idea what language it was, should have gotten some recordings of it. We kept telling him he had to speak English now. When I was little, I asked my mum when we would play the game we played when I was the mum. At that time no one had told me that my grandmother was a step-grandma and my biological grandmother died when my mum was 5. Really freaked my mum out. I also talked to a man who I thought lived in the wall in the basement. Yes, I was an odd child.
This is actually a past life memory I've had, I guess. When I was 18 and dating my husband, we were going on a double date with his sister and her GF. It was my first time meeting him, so we had agreed on meeting up at our favorite bar. From the moment we were introduced, we both got super excited to see each other and hugged super tight, and I honestly felt like I haven't seen her in years and was so relieved. My husband was confused and thought we knew each other, but we'd obviously never met. It was strange, but I automatically knew I knew her in another life. It was a super strange but strong feeling. We're great friends, family now. We haven't talked about it in a while, but we joke about it every once in a while now, lol.
I'll answer for my grandpa since he passed sadly. My dad and uncle said to me that when I was 3/4 I once looked at my grandpa and said, "JB, didn't you remember when we went bar hopping in Australia between island campaigns during the war and I tried to flirt with the brown-hair Australian girl before died on that island?" Apparently I said that, and my grandpa admitted that during WW2 him and a friend went bar hopping and one of his closest friends tried to flirt with a brown-haired Australian girl and died in the Philippines. According to them, my grandpa, he never told them, let alone me, about that. Also, JB was my grandpa's initials he went by, but I didn't know that yet.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.